In 1919, the Plymouth Antiquarian Society was established by a group of women to preserve Plymouth's post-Pilgrim history and tell the stories of everyday life in this community. Julie invited Executive Director Ann Mason to talk about the Society's history and its plans for the future.
Welcome, Anne. You are the Executive Director of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society. Can you tell us a little bit about the Society, the museum, and your mission?
Absolutely. The Antiquarian Society was founded in 1919 to preserve and share local history. And we actually have three museums. We have three historic house museums: the 1677 Harlow House, the 1749 Spooner House, and the 1809 Hedge House. So spread out throughout the waterfront downtown area. And when you come to visit each of those houses, and they are free to Plymouth residents, when you come to visit, you're invited to step back in time and learn about everyday life in those different centuries.
Wow. What are some of the favorite artifacts that you have in those three different houses?
I think it's impossible to pick even a short list of favorites. I would say that one of the special things about our collection is that we have objects and archival materials that relate in particular to the three families who lived in the houses. And so I think that really helps us develop this rich understanding of who they were and their relationships to each other and just the family networks between them. One of my favorite objects is actually a tall clock that was built in London in 1725. It's in one of our rooms at the Hedge House, and it was owned by Lydia Gardner Goodwin, who was the mother of another Lydia who ended up living in the Hedge House in the 19th century. But this tall clock came over from London to this part of the country, and it still ticks today. So I love sitting in my office and being able to hear it, keeping time every day. And I think that's just a wonderful connection to the past and thinking about how so many people in the Hedge House have heard that clock over the years.
Right, and how many ticks has that had over the
Right.
centuries? Good grief. How is the Plymouth Antiquarian Society adapting to the pandemic?
Well, like all museums and cultural organizations, we were forced to close last year for much of the year. We did establish a new reservation system so that we could have guided tours in the fall at the Hedge House, and we are hoping to have guided tours resume again this year for all three houses. But we were faced with this question of how do we encourage the cultivation of meaningful relationships within the community through engagement with the past, because that's the reason why we preserve and share history, is because we think it can bring the community together and help us understand who we are. And we have a lot of fun doing that. We build a lot of friendships that way. So we pivoted to presenting virtual programs. We offered live stream tours on Facebook. We had Zoom webinars throughout the year. We also created a take-home summer program for young history lovers, which we offered to anyone who wanted to do it. It was free to them. And so that was something that was really special for us to be able to connect with those younger learners as well. And this year we're continuing to do that. So we're going to be doing we have our first Saturday history tours, which we present in partnership with Pilgrim Hall Museum, and then we have a series of what we call lunchtime conversations, which are more informal virtual programs about local history and research that's happening now, current research and ongoing projects, and sort of behind the scenes looks into different local collections. So all sorts of virtual ways to connect.
Great. So you've kept it going. You've kept the messaging going. That's wonderful. Now, March was National Women's Month. What is the significance of the month in terms of celebrating women in history, especially local history?
So it's interesting that National Women's History Month has its roots in the early 1980s, and there was a National Women's History Week to begin with, and then it expanded into a month. And it came out of this recognition that a lot of written history depended on records kept by men and really focused on men's achievements. And so Women's History Month is intended to celebrate the contributions that women have made to the United States, throughout the time of settlement and beyond. And I think this is something we should actually do throughout the year. So we shouldn't limit women's history to just Women's History Month, but does give us a nice opportunity to focus on women's history. And this is something that's been very special to the Antiquarian Society since we were founded. All of our founders were women, and they were truly visionary women who were concerned about the destruction of historic landmarks. And they came forward and they said, we need to save what we now call the hedge house from being demolished. They were able to convince all of the male power brokers in town to make that a possibility. And so all the way back in 1919, they were focused on everyday history. And a lot of that everyday history involved women's lives, things that had never really been preserved before or shared before. They wanted to know what people ate and how did they cook their food and what did they wear and how did they make their clothes. And so they actually founded some very innovative educational programs, hands-on educational programs to help people really understand life in the past and especially women's history. So I think that's just a wonderful legacy that we have, not just during Women's History Month, but throughout the year.
Absolutely. Now, we, as people who live in this area, care very much about Plymouth's history, but why should the rest of the country actually care?
That's a great question. And I think we all know that Plymouth Rock and the Pilgrim story has had a huge impact on how people understand the United States, the origins of the nation, and what it means to be American. We have this national holiday, Thanksgiving, that's connected to the Plymouth story. And so even, if we don't necessarily agree with the way the story has been interpreted in the past, I think it's really important to understand Plymouth's history in order to deepen our understanding of the nation and our search for roots. And that's really what has happened, is that the Pilgrims are, held up because we have this need for roots and for understanding where we came from and for creating a narrative. And so I think it's important to understand that narrative and understand the true history of what actually happened, and then how that story has been told in different generations.
Right. So history in general is a super important thing for all of us to look at and to study. Overall, why do you think history is so important to our country?
Well, I think history provides us with context, and I don't think it's very good to live without context. We need context to make decisions about the future and to understand where we are today. And so when we look at the past, we can look at the good and the bad, and we can hopefully understand, again, the nation, but also locally, we can understand how our community grew and changed and what that means for us today. Because history teaches us about people, and people living in previous generations were certainly different than we are, but they were still people. And so I think it can provide inspiration. It can provide challenges to the way that we view the world. And it can also be fun. I don't want to leave that out. So studying history can be really fun. It gives us a chance to really travel through time and learn stories that might be funny or engaging or inspirational. So it's just a great way to encounter the world.
Yes, I totally agree. And do you have any upcoming events that folks should know about?
We do. So I mentioned earlier that we have a first Saturday history tour series that we present with Pilgrim Hall Museum. And so Saturday, April 3rd at 1 p.m., we will have a virtual tour by Stephen O'Neill, who's the executive director of the Hanover Historical Society. And he just published a book with Marshfield Historical Society on Peregrine White, who was born on the Mayflower in 1620. And so Stephen will be joining us to talk about Peregrine's life. And then on Wednesday, April 14th at 12:30 p.m., we will be having our lunchtime conversation for April, and I'll be joined by Julie Burry, who is the history room archivist at the Plymouth Public Library, and she'll be talking about the local history collections they have there and what sources are available for studying local history. So both of those events, all the details are on our website, and you can register for them on our website, or they will be streaming to our Facebook page as well. So you don't even need to register for them. You can just go onto our page and there they'll be.
Excellent. Dr. Ann Mason, thank you so much. This was wonderful. We all love history, and history is ever present. And every second that ticks on, the previous seconds were history. So thank you.
To learn more, visit PlymouthAntiquarian.org.